Welcome to Kop Talks, the only show where Kop gets to talk to you. Wait, what's that? He talks in every stream? Well, whatever. Kop Talks is filmed before a live studio audience in Azeroth, or at the very least, an undead one. And now, here's the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, a tower of power, the hardest working man on YouTube. Here's Kop! What is up, my peeps? Welcome to the very first episode of Kop Talks. How are you all doing? I welcome you back, but this is our first ever episode. How is everybody doing? It is your main man Kop here. We've got an interesting topic today. Something that's been bugging me for a while now because there's been a lot of discussion around certain classes and your allied races. Most especially Death Knights. Demon Hunters to a lesser extent, but most especially Death Knights. As people want to play their Mag'har Orc Death Knight, or their Zandalari Death Knight, or I guess called Tyrann Death Knight? I don't know. Who knows? And what I'd really like to do is just talk a little bit about it. I got a little bit of a script here, so I might pause from time to time and look at my script. I hope you'll bear with me. And while we're doing that, I'm going to take my Death Knight, Anjay here, and we're going to farm a little bit of gold from some raids that I don't normally do on stream. Just stuff that I really don't have to think about because I'm going to be talking about stuff. Now, it seems to be the community at large is quite anxious to have Death Knights on all the races, and rightfully so. They're the first ever hero class. But let's take a look at why Blizzard is probably right not to allow allied race Death Knights just yet. And I know that's not exactly the world's most popular opinion. Let's have a look at a couple of reasons why it makes sense. First, let's have a look at the lore. And I apologize if you're not a lore junkie, we'll go through this as quick as possible. But it is something we do need to address. And I'm not going to go into a great amount of minutia here. There are plenty of other wonderful videos, not the least of all somebody like Novel. WoW Wiki. Stuff like that will go into a great... And there's a whole amount of lore regarding Death Knights all the way back to the Second War. So there's a lot of lore, and we don't want to get too much into that. It was make the video about 3 hours long that we did. That being said, I want to dive into some of the basic background. So if you're new to the game, or you just really never paid attention to the lore because it's that RP crap, give you a better idea for where the lore objection to allied races being given immediate access to Death Knights comes from. Now, player-created Death Knights are, first and foremost, they're undead. They're a very special form of undead, but they are undead. They're heroes who fought against the Scourge or got caught up in its rampage across Azeroth prior to the events of the World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. Now, but after the initial rampage of the Scourge across Azeroth. So I'm having to actually look at what I'm doing a little bit more than I intended to. That's not good. Oh, come down. So, for a player to be a Death Knight, part of that ilk that we're talking about, player-created Death Knights, as it exists right now, he had to have been a race that would be accessible to Arthas Menethil as he was either rampaging across the Eastern Kingdoms as he got back from Northrend, or in Northrend. Around that is what we're looking at, right? This means that lore-wise, races like the Mag'har, Nightborn, Lightforge, Void Elves, and yeah, even Pandaren would by definition be unable to be player-created Death Knights. Now, before you go typing some of your angry retort comments in the comment section, hear me out, would you? About the Pandaren? Yes, I know about G, the Pandaren DK Garrison follower from Warlords of Draenor campaign. Yep, I know that means there could potentially be other Pandaren Death Knights out there who got caught up by Arthas. That being said, the Pandaren of Pandaria are kind of disqualified from it, due to them being hidden behind the mists. G's not from Pandaria, she's from the Wandering Isle, for one thing. And every Pandaren that was behind those mists, they just had no desire to go out to the world because they thought the rest of the world was dead. Everything beyond the mist was destroyed when the Legion invaded some 10,000 or so years ago. And the Night Elves' Well of Eternity was destroyed. That's why the Emperor Shaohao created the mist to begin with, right? So, the only Pandaren, how the Pandaren got out on that turtle in the first place was, essentially those were the adventurous ones. They would go on the turtle every few generations. A group of adventurous Pandaren would find the turtle had come back to Pandaria, hop on board, and off they go. But it had been several lifetimes since anybody had gotten on that turtle from Pandaria. So we know that G can't be from Pandaria. If you play through the quest line on the Great Turtle as a Pandaren, as you guys know I main a Pandaren, you kind of get the feeling that the ones from the Great Turtle would never have been too adventurous to begin with certain major exceptions. You know, obviously there's Lily Stormstout, Chen Stormstout, and G. Those are really the only ones who were even considered adventurous. And the only one really known to leave the Isle was Chen Stormstout. And then in WoD we learned about G. So sure, you know what? There could have been a bunch of other Pandarens that left the Wandering Isle. There could have been. It's highly unlikely because Pandarens desperately looked down upon any Pandaren that had any sense of adventure or wanderlust. So it's really, really doubtful that there would be enough Pandaren out there, lore-wise, to make up the amount that you would need to have it use the DK starter area. And I should mention this, really. What we're talking about here is using the current Death Knight starter area. Because they could always add another Death Knight starter area. But we'll get to that later. So we know that Pandaren kind of not going to be something that a race that could. So, but then you say to me, hey Kop, what about the goblins and the worgans? They shouldn't be Death Knights then, under your theory of things. Well, the thing is, there were plenty of goblins and worgans in the world, and in fact in the World of Warcraft, long before Wrath of the Lich King ever happened. There were worgans running all over Silverpine Forest. There were goblins all the way back to Warcraft 2. All over Warcraft 3 in the Eastern Kingdoms as well. There are just a whole bunch of available bodies. You got to remember too that if you do the worgan starting area, those events supposedly take place during vanilla times. So in other words, before Wrath of the Lich King.
Um, and when you turn feral, you supposedly wander the woods for years as a feral worgen before you're recaptured, and that's right before the cataclysm hits and the wall comes down. But there were a lot of worgen that were just feral, running all over the place, both behind the wall and on the other side of it. And we interacted with them in vanilla and Burning Crusade when we were leveling through Silverpine. We interacted with quite a few of the worgen, so it's entirely possible for there to be worgen and goblin Death Knights. That's perfectly within the lore. But there's no way for you to get alternate universe Mag'har back during a time when they didn't even exist yet, if you believe Blizzard's lore of... part of what Blizzard says in the lore, and I don't necessarily agree with this myself, but part of what they say in their lore is that the alternate universe Draenor is a split path that was created when Kairos Dormu went there with Garrosh. We believe in alternate universe theory. You know that every universe that can exist does exist, and one would assume it's the same in the Warcraft universe. So I'm just going to scroll through my notes here so I know where I'm at. So that pretty much handles 7 of the 11 allied races that were added, or even not even allied races that were added since Wrath of the Lich King, and why they could or could not be. I mean, your Void Elves couldn't be. Void Elves just didn't exist. They would have been Blood Elf. Your Nightborn were hidden behind their shield. Arthas wouldn't have been able to get at them. Mag'har were from another dimension. All that stuff. So we're left with 4 races. And they range in likelihood from somewhat likely with the Zandalari, who had major players in vanilla. They even had their own faction and their own reputation and all that kind of stuff. And they're very much about the ZG raid. The somewhat unlikely Kaltirans and High Mountain Taurens never really interacted with the Scourge in any meaningful way. I mean, High Mountain was never assaulted. We would have heard about it. We're doing all that lore on High Mountain. We would have heard about it, and we didn't. It could have been the odd High Mountain Tauren that went wandering away from the Broken Isles, but seeing as we never saw any of those anywhere, it's unlikely. And Arthas never went to the Broken Isles, so he wouldn't have gone after them there. As for Kaltirans, I think they're somewhat unlikely too, in so much as there weren't many Kaltirans in the Eastern Kingdoms to begin with, and any Kaltiran that were there basically followed Jaina west across the sea. And I'm just gonna keep doing stuff here so you're not looking at a blank screen. They followed Jaina west across the sea when at the same time when Arthas was sailing to Northrend, because that's, if you remember, when Arthas called Stratholme and Jaina found the city shortly after. It was shortly after that Medivh came to her and said, "Hey, you should probably go and find Kalimdor." And the navy that she gathered was the Kaltiran navy. She gathered every scrap of Kaltiran forces that existed in the Eastern Kingdom she could find, what was, who she could get from Dalaran that would believe her, and what elves she could find who would be willing to go with her. And off she went. Some paladins as well. So she left before the Scourge had destroyed Lordaeron. So there wasn't any Kaltirans there, and Arthas never went to Kaltiris that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm wrong. Please feel free to correct me in the comments if you've got a good source for that. But that kind of takes care of the Kaltirans. Let's see. I'm going to check my notes to see if there's any... I suppose there could have been some Stranglers, but they wouldn't have been the heroes that Arthas needed to create the type of Death Knights we're talking about. Remember, there's literally 4 different generations of Death Knights. We're talking about the 3rd generation, the one the players control. Let's see. That kind of leaves Dark Irons. It's possible, maybe plausible, that they could have, that they could have interacted with the Scourge. I don't know, because they were fairly sheltered in their cities and in Molten Core. They were under the sway of the elemental lords, and Arthas basically didn't mess with them. Most of the dwarves Arthas got were from Muradin's expedition, and some that were from his own. So, well, no, it wouldn't have been from his own, because he didn't have any dwarves in his expedition when he met up with Muradin. So yeah, they would be all from Muradin's expedition, and maybe a bit from the Scouring of Lordaeron, but not much. You gotta remember, Arthas was still very much being controlled by the Dreadlords at that point when he scoured Lordaeron. Later on, when he came back, he was too busy trying not to get killed by Sylvanas to go after kingdoms like Ironforge. So the only dwarves that Arthas would have had access to would have been the ones that assaulted the Plague Lands, the ones that assaulted the original Naxxramas. So that's basically what we're looking for there. So it would have had some dwarves, but Dark Iron ones, I don't think so. I don't think so. And you remember, the Dark Iron Dwarves really didn't even bolster the Alliance. I've got a whole little bit here on how they didn't bolster the Alliance until after the Cataclysm. They didn't really step up until BFA. So yeah, that kind of takes care of, lore-wise, why those 11 races kind of shouldn't be DKs, lore-wise. There are ways around that, and we can talk about that a little bit. I'm just going to take a little bit of a dramatic pause, and just in case anybody figured out what time code they should do to get to this part, skip the lore. So, since we established that, 7 of the 11 playable races added after Wrath of the Lich King should not ever be able to be Arthasian, Arthas made DKs. Let's talk about why there should be new Bolvar 4 Dragon made DKs. To put it simply, I want to put 2 main quotes from the story of Wrath of the Lich King, and I'll do my best to imitate them. The last vestiges of Arthas may have been the only things holding the Lich King back from destroying all of Azeroth. And the other one, there must always be a Lich King. Darn, those Blizzard people are smart and creative. They knew that they were going to be adding more and more races as they added more and more expansions, right? They knew that they oh, I'm being distracted by these. One of these days I'm going to have to actually just not do this kind of thing while I'm trying to talk. They knew that if they wanted to create more and more races that could be Death Knights, they would eventually have to have new ways of creating those Death Knights, lore-wise. So, by keeping the Lich King around and making it so there always has to be a Lich King, they created a way for that to happen. It wouldn't be Death Knights created by Arthas, they'd be Death Knights created by the new Lich King, Bolvar 4 Dragon. Now I could sit here and go on and on about why Death Knights need to be created by the Lich King at all, and I will to a certain extent. To be a Death Knight, you're not just getting trained to do it. You can't just train somebody to be a Death Knight. For one, they're undead. For two, they're a very powerful form of undead. They have to be raised in a very special way, and the only being on the planet that's ever been able to do it, that's still around, has the knowledge and the power, is the Lich King. And at the moment, the Lich King is Bolvar Fordragon. Let's talk a little bit, and again, we're going a little bit into the lore a little bit, but what the heck. It's what I do best. So, let me read directly from my notes here, because again, first time ever doing a podcast, and I'm not very good yet. If you read some of the great novel by Christie Golden, talks about the rise of the Lich King, there's, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, there is a part in there where it talks about Arthas conquering the spirit of Ner'zhul in there and banishing it so that he can take full control of the Lich King. And it's kind of heavily implied that this is this is when Arthas wakes up and starts assaulting Azeroth. That kind of goes against that other quote that I told you earlier about the last vestiges of Arthas being the only thing holding the Scourge back. I kind of think that up until he was completely consumed by the Lich King, Arthas was holding back the Scourge from attacking. He was the one thing protecting Azeroth. He was as Fordring said, he was the jailer of the damned. Now, it's interesting time-wise because depending on how you look at the timeline, it was between 6 to 8 years from when Arthas was corrupted to the events of Wrath of the Lich King. Timeline-wise, it's been about 6 years since we defeated Arthas and Fordring put that mask on. Every single thing we saw from Fordragon. I gotta get those two names mixed up, you'll have to forgive me. Since Fordragon put that mask on, everything we've seen from the Lich King during Legion was shady as all get out. It was just almost see him being corrupted. He attacked Light's Hope Chapel again the same way that Arthas did. Because he wanted what was there. The same way that Arthas did. He's being corrupted. Arthas could never completely banish that spirit of Ner'zhul. It's still in there because that's the Legion put it there. And Arthas was too corrupted when he put that helmet on to be able to cleanse it. I mean, he was not like a paladin who was the greatest paladin ever and was thrown the Ashbringer, touched it, and became pure. He'd already given up his soul to Frostmourne when he put that helmet on. He wasn't going to be able to purify that. The Lich King out of there, he was going to be able to contain it. When he finally couldn't anymore, that's when Azeroth was attacked, and we defeated him, and Bolvar put the helmet on. It's been about the same amount of time now. Who's to say that Bolvar hasn't been corrupted too? See, Bolvar was also corrupted when he put that helmet on because he'd been infected by the plague. He'd been hit by the dragon fire to be made immortal. He'd been tortured mind, body, and spirit by Arthas for almost a year between the events of the Wrathgate and the events when he put on the helmet. He was corrupted. There's no reason to believe that at this point Bolvar Fordragon isn't giving in to the corruption that is the Lich King. And in another couple of years, when we get our next expansion, who's to say we don't get the conclusion of that story? The two most popular expansions in the history of World of Warcraft and I say popular, I'm not going to say best or worst or anything like that, but most popular, based on the numbers we know, Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King. Burning Crusade got a part 2. Who's to say Wrath of the Lich King won't get a part 2, in which we see a new type of Death Knight created, and perhaps even a way of creating Death Knights besides through the Lich King. Perhaps that knowledge gets passed on to somebody. Some of his 4 horsemen. Don't get me wrong, we've seen people besides the Lich King create Death Knights, but they've always been channeling the Lich King's power and doing the Lich King's will when they do so. They've never been doing it on their own. Sylvanas cannot create a Death Knight, despite all the Valkyr she has. The Valkyr can resurrect a Death Knight, but they can't create them. Again, we're getting a bit into lore there, but it's important. It really is. Okay. Yeah, and I mean, I make a couple of points here where I talk about who's to say we now need a Lich King? Again, if we could pass that knowledge on to create DKs when we add other races, mixing my gameplay and my lore here, who's to say we need a Lich King? We've got the Silver Hand back now, we've got all these orders. That mechanism that they provided us by coming together to fight the Legion that could handle destroying the undead on Azeroth. Not to mention, outside of Northrend, the undead have been slowly falling back. Look at the Plaguelands. Look at Eastern Plaguelands. It's nowhere near as infected as it used to be. The Western Plaguelands hasn't had the same effect yet, but it's slowly being pushed back because the Lich King was defeated. I make a point here. From a game development standpoint, the reason that we must always have a Lich King, and we talked a little bit about this, is the ability to create DKs. Yeah, I think I already talked about that. At the end of the day, World of Warcraft is a very special animal. Let's move on to what less lore, and let's see what we've got outside of the lore that would not only prevent it from being a good idea to just give all the races Death Knights, but how could we bring that back and get the Death Knights and use those allied races getting Death Knights to our advantage? Let's say World of Warcraft is a very special animal when it comes to gaming. It's an MMORPG. Now, the last 3 letters of that have got to be at least, if not more important than the first 3 letters. It's a role-playing game. One of the people I was talking to about this made a very interesting point that I tend to disagree with, that all the best games have had very little story to them. Disagree. I think all the best games have had the most story to them. I mean, you guys know me. I've said it many times, I'm a lore junkie. But Blizzard has gone out of their way to keep the lore intact. Now there are a lot of things that we can talk about gameplay-wise that break the lore, and we'll get to those. But Blizzard's gone to a very, very large extent to keep that lore intact. They've done a lot. As I said, they haven't caved on DKs. They kept the first demon hunters to be only blood elf and night elf. How much easier it would have been on them to give every race that you could be at the beginning of Legion demon hunters. You know, or at the very least every race that Illidan would have had access to, including some Draenei. Anybody who could have been part of Illidan's Legion once the Alliance and Horde went to Outland could possibly have been a demon hunter. And even now, you got to think they could have added other races to demon hunters, because being a demon hunter is something you can train. It's not like being a Death Knight. have to die to become a demon hunter. You just have to scoop your eyeballs out at some point. Sorry, I don't mean to get too graphic. I don't, but... One of the reasons why World of Warcraft has survived where other MMOs failed is it had so much lore going in. But one of the other reasons why it was so successful was because the gameplay was so good. Even when you got other MMOs that have superior gameplay, let's say, they didn't have the lore backing it up. Or when they had the lore backing it up, maybe even more. You know, you've had a Star Wars MMO. The gameplay suffered a little bit. And any of it, the innovations that they might have had in gameplay, Blizzard was able to quickly adapt. Why we have world quests instead of dailies. Now, there have been bumps along the road for both sides of the gameplay versus lore dynamic. I mean, we've had about 25 years of Warcraft at this point, right? And look at what a lot of the stuff they retcon, like in Warcraft 1, it was the Kingdom of Azeroth that was being invaded. It's not the Kingdom of Stormwind. Or, you know, in Wrath of the Lich King, when they had that Titan-made map of Azeroth that they presumably scanned from space, it didn't have Pandaria on it, or Kal Tiras, or Zandalari. You know, somebody made a comment, again, when I was talking to him, was, well, none of the lore ever makes any sense, because it doesn't make any sense that we have helicopters, but we discover brand new continents every 2 years. Thing of it is, we didn't discover any of these continents. They were already there in the lore. Pandaria was there in the lore. Warcraft 3. We didn't know where it was. It's because it was shrouded by the mists. They did that very well. Kal Tiras was there. Kal Tiras was there in Warcraft 2. Zandalari's been there since vanilla. The Broken Isles have been there since Warcraft 2. Was it 1? My brain's getting fried at this point. But Northrend's been there since Warcraft 3. It's not that we're discovering these continents. It's that we're getting access to them. Okay? I mean, if you look at the original maps of Warcraft, World of Warcraft, when they were still developing it, vanilla, Northrend was in there. Kal Tiras was there. Zandalar was there. It's not like those things didn't exist. It's that we didn't have access to them, so they weren't on our map. It's not that they weren't on any map. It's that they weren't on our map. It will be interesting, and I will concede that point only if we do what I think we should do, which is find out that there's a southern hemisphere that we don't know about, where they retcon the world to have a southern hemisphere. One of the things that's always, and I can't remember how many years ago it was, but at BlizzCon somebody asked about a southern hemisphere because Pandaria's not cold like Northrend is. And if, you know, Azeroth is a standard planet that we know that obeys the rules and laws of physics, the southern ice cap should be cold just like the northern one is, right? Because the planet goes like this as it rotates, just like ours does. So, southern ice cap should be cold too. So, Blizzard said that at the time, they said we're open to the idea of adding a southern half to that, which of course would force them to retcon those maps in Alduar, all that stuff. But they've done a lot of that. They've retconned the lore, but they've also retconned the gameplay to more closely match the lore. I mean, look at the way they've emphasized class fantasy on lore. So, I think there is lots of different ways that they have kept both sides strong. through the thousands and thousands of tweaks they've made to the game. The core remains, and should remain so, strong. You can keep both sides going and still provide us with allied race Death Knights. And we've already talked about how. I know most of you, my peeps, have heard me talk one time or another about being a lore junkie, and it's no secret that I play video games for the same reason I read a book. For the story told. To me, it's all important. I would rather play a video game that handles poorly, even incredibly poorly, yet had an amazing story, to one that is all about the gameplay, but has no meaningful narrative. That's why I don't typically play shooters, PvP-based games, games that are weak on story. I also don't generally PvP. I also understand many people feel the complete opposite, and if you do, that's entirely fine. You're entitled to that. You know, that's your view on it. I got no problem with that. I'm saying there's a way to keep both together. Okay? People that don't give a darn about RP crap, they're just here to pwn noobs, down a boss, get that no-scope 360 headshot teabag kill. Pretty sure I said that right. I think that's what you young whippersnappers are saying, right? Greatest strength that Blizzard ever had, besides a commitment to attempting to make quality games that they themselves would enjoy playing, is balancing the two sides. This is especially important in RPG games. I mean, it's one of the things... Let me rephrase that. It's one thing to have a threadbare story, like an FPS, like Overwatch, where all you're doing is, okay, we're going to go and capture this point, we're going to protect this payload, we're going to do one or two, maybe 5 or 6 things over and over again. There's no actual story to it. Oh yeah, now we're in Hanamura, now we're in Blizzard World, now we're in... It's not story-based, but from the beginning, from that first step we take where the guy asks us to go and kill and get 10 bear asses, what we're doing is story-based. We've got story in each and every quest we do. There's story in each and every raid we do. Take a look at this guy. I'm going to kill him while I talk. Take a look at this Shaw here, right? There's a point to killing him. It's part of the story of Pandaria. It's part of the story of Miss Pandaria. We're fighting these Shah spirits that were created when the Titans did not kill Yasharj. That were created when Yasharj's heart was allowed to drip into the land. And they each take on a different negative aspect of emotion.
Beware.
And that's something we do. We went after, which this one is, the Shah of Fear. This is what we're going after. We're conquering our fears. So there is story to what we are doing. It's not just, okay, now we've cleared the Terrace of Endless Fear. It's not just a name, it means something. Okay, now where did I put that portal to get me out of here? Ah, there it is. I mean, in Warcraft, at least on the PvE side, I'm just going to go back to reading this because I really took a lot of time to think about these, so sometimes I'm just going to go back to my notes, and I apologize about that. At least on the PvE side, our objectives are there right from the first quest, as I say. But RPG games have always been somewhat unique and apart from the odd outlier on this subject. I mean, look at some of the best RPG games of all time. They are story focused. From the Ultima series, from the old gold box D&D games, the Final Fantasies, the Witcher series, Dragon Age, Coder, all excelled at storytelling for the most part. Because that's what good RPGs are. They're storytelling engines. They're an art form, yes, but they're an engine for telling a story. They capture our imagination. They make us sink thousands of hours into it. Oh, I gotta go find that entire set of Witcher gear. I need that enhanced Wolf School. Or maybe I need that tier set from Terrace of the Endless Spring. You know, you spend hours caring about the stories. That's what an RPG is. It's a story engine. It drives us to explore, to sink ourselves into the story. I should probably point out at this juncture, I do understand that the MMO part of the MMORPG changes that equation a little bit. And it's a key difference where there's an opportunity for gameplay versus story balance. And it's this opportunity where Blizzard thrives. You see, the main difference between an MMORPG and an RPG is the player and the player agency. In your bog standard RPG, you're the hero or group of heroes. We do not, to a large extent, create these heroes. Sometimes we do. But even when we do, there's not another group of heroes out there that are doing the exact same thing at the exact same time in the exact same place. Usually, maybe there's a game or two out there like it. I don't know. But there's no other player-controlled one, because they're solo games, right? Or in the Witcher series, you're Geralt of Rivia. You're not Metro Lol of Silvermoon, or Anjay, the Tauren Death Knight. You're Geralt of Rivia every single time you play it, because you're following the story. I mean, sure, we make choices for the heroes, and our games will differ. Like, maybe in Final Fantasy 1, take it. We've got the classic Light Warriors. Well, we've got a whole bunch of different ones that we can choose from. We can give them different weapons, different loadouts. But at the same time, we're following that same story that's laid out. The path may be somewhat linear, or may be branching and open world. We're still following the stories that have been laid out for us. Because it's an RPG, and telling stories is what they do. Yeah, the gameplay's important, but that story's got to be there. It's the one thing that always has to be there. Now, this next bit is going to get very, very important. So I'm going to board a very particular mountain. We'll just fly around Pandaria a bit while I talk about it. And since we're, talking about morally gray Death Knights, we'll get on my one mount, Morally Gary. We'll fly around Pandaria a bit while I talk about this. Because I'm going to read this verbatim. You guys know my mind can get stuck and I can forget names and stuff, so I'm going to read this bit verbatim because it is kind of important. As soon as it pop out of the portal. Oh dear. Now let me just bring up the map so I can hit the number lock key. or point myself in a particular direction and hit the number lock key until I hear the beep telling me I'm gone too far. In an MMORPG, when we're playing the story, the PvE aspects, we're one of many groups of people doing the same thing. That's why the top level content is designed around this. From a 40-man raid of Molten Core to a 20-man Mythic Uldir run to a +20 Temple of Sethralis, the encounters themselves all focus around the players, plural. And it's different than a single-player RPG. We need the other players. When I asked my buddy Metro of One Azeroth TV, who you should definitely check out his channel, watch his streams and videos, sub to all his stuff, what he saw as the biggest violation of lore favoring gameplay, he said to me it had to do with how the players are treated. We're vanquishers of dragon aspects, titans, old gods, elemental lords, and we have world quests to pick up hyena poop. It's not right. Just to gain a little bit of minimal reputation with a group of fox people, it's not right. We should be famous. By all accounts, yet every 2 years we go to a slightly new place, we meet slightly new people who have no idea who we are, what we have done. Metro and some of the good people in his Discord pointed out that players, through this player agency, disregard lore all the time on a daily basis, multiple times a day even. This really got me thinking, and this is why I took the time to actually write this down instead of shooting it up off the top of my head. Instead of just shooting from the hip. It's upon thinking about this that I started to think about how the lore of WoW is portrayed in the Chronicles, the World of Warcraft Chronicles, which Blizzard uses as a guide. It's their official, this is what happened. This is what the lore is. And every time we start a new expansion, that solidifies. This is what happened in vanilla. Bang, we're now in Burning Crusade. That's solidified. We know who defeated the Molten Core. We know what happened in Blackrock Spires, 2 instances. All that stuff. And I kind of had a bit of a revelation about it. And stick with me, because it's kind of weird. And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, and maybe it won't hit you guys that way, but it does. It's hitting me that way. When it comes to the lore in the Warcraft universe, the player, insofar as the lore is concerned, is completely 100% besides the point. Reading the lore of how Ragnaros was defeated in Molten Core, or how Anixie was bested in her lair back in vanilla, doesn't say Grasshopper led a raid of guildies with Metrolol and Diabolical and Vicario and Sylar and Harry, and it doesn't say that. It says a group of heroes. It can't say that. If for no other reason than there are literally millions of people who have completed it before and continue to do so every single day. That's why the content is instanced. Sure, there could be lots of characters who at some point hand in Planestrider beaks. Thousands of people might hand in Planestrider beaks to get a hunting quest progression in the Crossroads. Sure. But how many groups of people in canon lore purified the Wailing Caverns of the snake cult that was infesting it? Really can only happen once. That's why it's instance content. by passing through those instant portals, and I know this sounds a little bit oversimplistic, so bear with me, we're taking part of an event which happened if we were there or not, lore-wise at least. We're inserting ourselves into something that's already happened vis-a-vis the lore and simply playing it out like you would in any RPG. You know, if I'm playing Final Fantasy 1 and I've got my group of light warriors have done everything, they're facing the final boss of chaos, I'm playing that situation out as it's programmed for me. It's that story. And when me and my guildies go into Mythic Antorus, the Burning Throne, and are fighting Argus, that happened whether we go in there or not. Argus was defeated in the lore, whether Metro led our guild in there or not. Whether anybody led their guild in there or not. It happened. And it wasn't the players who did it. The closest we get to that, the players doing it, is in the lore it'll say a group of Alliance heroes cleared the Molten Core. A group of Horde heroes cleared Blackrock Spire. That's about as close as it gets to saying, you guys did this. Because we didn't. It's another group of heroes. That's why, we can sit there and farm all the reputation we want. We're not the ones who in the end did the things that were so iconic. Because we can't be. We can never be those people. Because that can only happen once. Maybe if you're Method, you're all those players in Method and you cleared that world first. But if they gave players that kind of actual agency, that kind of actual lore agency, it would invalidate the game. It's the one great conceit in an MMORPG. It's the one great suspension of disbelief. I don't mean to spoil it for you if you haven't heard it, but professional wrestling is scripted. Sorry. The outcomes of the matches are predetermined. But we set that aside when we watch it because that's the conceit of the sport. That's the suspension of disbelief that it asks of us. Well, the suspension of disbelief that an MMORPG asks of us is that we're involved in the lore when we're not. We're playing the lore out. We're playing out the events that happened. But as I say, Onyxia was always defeated. Ragnaros was always sent back into his little pool in Molten Core, whether we did it or not. Consider somebody who joined the game during Burning Crusade. Never went to Molten Core. For him, was Molten Core not cleared? No, it was done. So it wasn't him. But maybe, 5 or 6 years down the road, he goes and solos it. So he can't be the one in the lore who killed Ragnaros in there, or sent him back to the elemental plane. He just can't be. And since he can't be, neither can the first people who did it. So, as far as an MMO goes, the lore, the story being told, is outside of what we are doing. This means that all the little bits of gameplay that would normally conflict with lore, such as talent points or getting rid of weapon skills, all that stuff, the fact that we have a very simplified talent tree, all that stuff doesn't contradict the lore. It doesn't matter Because it's outside of the lore. The players themselves are outside of the lore. They're simply playing through it. That's the conceit of an MMORPG. And I've probably repeated myself about 12 times, but I think it's very important. And as I say, this is where the gameplay isn't breaking the lore, it's interpreting it. It's allowing us to see through it. The lore is the backdrop and framework of our adventures, and all those little gameplay features are just an interface to access the lore with. So before I put you all to sleep with my ramblings, I'm just going to simply say this. There is a way to achieve great lore solution and allow gameplay to maintain its high level of importance. It simply requires the one thing that the Warcraft community isn't exactly known for. So I'm going to beg you here, my dear viewer, my good friends, my peeps, my Keystone Cops, anybody watching this video, have patience. Let Blizzard unfold the story they're trying to tell. Wait for that Wrath of the Lich King Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. Wait for that to come out. Because it will. It has to. It's the only way we will ever get Allied Race Death Knights, because Blizzard will not violate the lore. Because they never have. Just like the lore has never violated the gameplay. The two live in harmony because the basis of an MMO is that the two never shall meet. Never the twain shall meet. Now, if you disagree with any points that I've made, what I'd really like for you to do is leave me a comment. We can discuss it like rational human beings. Hey, make a response video. I'll leave a comment on yours and make a response video on yours too. We can talk about this. One of the greatest tragedies of people at opposite ends of the spectrum on issues with Warcraft is that they tend to get too caught up in, I'm right, no, you're right. I'm saying we can both be right. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe you're completely wrong. Let's talk about it and figure it out together, shall we? Let's set a good example for the rest of the Blizzard community. Let's show them just how awesome I know that you, my Keystone Cops, my peeps, my viewers, my fans, my babesies, can be. That is pretty much all I've got to say, guys. I'm going to do a little bit of work here on my original script for this, and I'll put a link in the description to it if you want to read something that's a little bit more in-depth and a little bit more organized and a little bit less rambling while I'm trying to kill a raid boss that should crumble with the first hit. I honestly thought that was going to work a heck of a lot more seamless than it did. So I apologize about that, because I had to actually look at some of the things I was doing. Anyway, guys, take care. Peace. I sure hope you want to see more of this. Cop out.